There are some stories that don't just haunt a family, they poison it, they seep into the bloodline like ink into water, staining every generation that follows. This is one of those stories, a small-town hospital. A teenage girl who couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't defend herself, and a pregnancy that should have been impossible. What happened in that room wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal so complete, so unthinkable, that when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just destroy lives, it shattered the illusion that monsters only exist in fairy tales. They don't. Sometimes they wear scrubs, sometimes they hold your hand while you sleep, and sometimes they're the last person anyone would ever suspect. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It was December of 2018 when the nurses at Hacienda HealthCare in Phoenix, Arizona, made a discovery that would become a nightmare no training could have prepared them for. A 29-year-old woman, we'll call her Jane Doe because her name was sealed by the courts, had been in a vegetative state since she was 3 years old. She had been a patient at this long-term care facility for over 2 decades, unable to communicate, unable to move on her own, dependent on staff for everything, feeding, bathing, turning in bed to prevent bed sores. She existed in a twilight world between life and death, her body alive, her mind unreachable. Her family visited, they held her hand, they spoke to her even though she couldn't respond, and the staff, the people entrusted with her care, were supposed to be her guardians, her protectors, but one of them wasn't. One of them saw something else when he looked at her, not a patient, not a human being, a target. The nurses noticed her abdomen was distended, swollen. At first they thought it might be a bowel obstruction, maybe fluid retention, something explainable. They called a doctor, ran tests, and then in a moment that turned the entire facility inside out with horror, they realized the truth. She was in labor, full term. No one had known. Not the day staff, not the night staff, not her family, not the administrators who were supposed to be monitoring her care. For 9 months, this woman had been carrying a child and no one noticed. Or worse, someone did, and said nothing. The baby was delivered that day, healthy and crying. But the question that echoed through every hallway, every room, every corner of that building was the one no one wanted to say out loud. Who did this to her? The Phoenix Police Department arrived within hours. This wasn't just medical malpractice or negligence. This was sexual assault on one of the most vulnerable human beings imaginable. Someone had entered her room, closed the door, and committed an act so vile that even hardened detectives struggled to process it. The facility went into lockdown mode. Every male employee was questioned, every male who had access to her room, her wing, her floor. Security footage was pulled, schedules were audited, time cards examined, and then came the DNA tests. Every male staff member was asked to submit a sample. Most complied immediately, eager to clear their names. But the investigation dragged on for weeks, and the public pressure became unbearable. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines screamed across the country. A woman in a coma, pregnant. How does that happen? Who was supposed to be watching? The facility's CEO resigned. The board of directors scrambled to contain the fallout. Families of other patients began pulling their loved ones out, terrified of what else might have happened behind those closed doors. And then one man refused to give his DNA. His name was Nathan Sutherland. He was a licensed practical nurse who had worked at Hacienda HealthCare for years. He was described by co-workers as quiet, professional, unremarkable. He had been one of Jane Doe's primary caretakers. He had access to her room at all hours. He had been alone with her countless times. When detectives obtained a court order for his DNA, the results came back within days. It was a match. Nathan Sutherland was the father of that baby, the man who had been trusted to care for her, to bathe her, to feed her, to keep her safe, had instead violated her in the most unspeakable way. He was arrested on January 22nd, 2019, charged with sexual assault and vulnerable adult abuse. His mugshot spread across Everson, iNews channel, every website, every newspaper. But the image that stayed with people wasn't his face. It was the image of that empty hospital room, the bed where she had lain, helpless for over 20 years, and the realization that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a uniform, carrying a clipboard, smiling. But here's where the story gets even darker, because this wasn't just about one predator and one victim. This was about a system that failed at every conceivable level. Hacienda HealthCare was a respected facility. It had been operating for decades. It cared for some of the most medically fragile people in Arizona, people who couldn't advocate for themselves, people whose families trusted the institution to treat them with dignity. And yet, for 9 months, no one noticed that a woman in their care was pregnant. Think about that. She was bathed regularly. She was examined by doctors. She was moved, dressed, monitored. How does a pregnancy go unnoticed for 9 months in a medical facility? The only answers are negligence or willful blindness. Either the staff wasn't paying attention, or they saw something and chose to ignore it. Both possibilities are equally horrifying. Internal documents later revealed that the facility had a history of complaints: staff shortages, inadequate supervision, patients left in soiled bedding for hours, medications administered incorrectly, but nothing was ever serious enough to shut the place down. Inspections came and went, violations were noted, corrections promised, and the cycle continued. Jane Doe's family had trusted Hacienda for over 20 years. They believed she was safe there. They had no reason to think otherwise, until the day they got the call that shattered everything. Your daughter just gave birth, and no one knows how. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was institutional. The very people and systems designed to protect the most vulnerable had become the source of their greatest harm. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something much larger, much darker. A culture where the powerless are invisible, where their suffering doesn't register because they can't speak, can't fight back, can't tell anyone what's being done to them. Nathan Sutherland's trial was supposed to bring answers. It was supposed to bring justice, but instead it brought something far more unsettling. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to sexual assault in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, followed by lifetime probation. 10 years. For raping a woman who couldn't defend herself, who couldn't even scream for help. The victim's family released a statement saying they were grateful the legal process was over, but that no sentence could ever undo the damage. And they were right. Because the damage wasn't just what happened to Jane Doe, it was what happened to her son. A child born from violence. A child who would one day grow up and ask questions about where he came from. How do you explain that? How do you tell a child that his existence began with one of the most horrific crimes imaginable? And what about Jane Doe herself? She remains in a vegetative state. She will never know what happened to her. She will never know she has a son. In some ways that's a mercy, but in others it's the cruelest part of all. She was robbed not just of her body, but of her story. She can't speak, she can't heal. She exists in the same twilight state she's been in for decades, unaware that her life became a headline, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything that can go wrong when society stops seeing certain people as human. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have been able to forgive the system that allowed this to happen? Or would the rage have consumed you? Let us know where you're watching from. We want to hear your thoughts. But the story doesn't end with Nathan Sutherland behind bars, because once the initial shock wore off, people started asking harder questions. How many others, how many other patients in how many other facilities have been abused in silence? The sad truth is, we don't know. The US Department of Justice estimates that people with disabilities are sexually assaulted at a rate 7 times higher than the general population. And those are just the reported cases. How many go unreported because the victim can't speak, can't write, can't dial 911? Hacienda HealthCare wasn't an anomaly, it was a window into a hidden epidemic. After the case went public, other families came forward with their own stories. A woman in a care facility in Texas who became pregnant and no one knew who the father was. A man in a group home in Florida who showed signs of physical abuse but couldn't communicate what happened. These stories don't make the news because they're too uncomfortable. They force us to confront something we'd rather not see. That our most vulnerable citizens are often our most invisible. That the places we trust to care for them are sometimes the places where the worst things happen. And then there's the psychological horror of it all. Imagine being Jane Doe's mother. For over 20 years you've visited your daughter. You've held her hand, brushed her hair, talked to her even though she can't respond. You've trusted the people caring for her. And then one day you find out she was raped. Repeatedly. Over who knows how long. And no one noticed. No one stopped it. The guilt would be unbearable. The rage would be all-consuming. How do you go on after that? How do you trust anyone again? The family's lawyer said they were focused on caring for the baby and making sure Jane Doe was moved to a safer facility. But you can hear the exhaustion in those words, the defeat. Because what is a safer facility? How do you ever feel safe again after something like this? The answer is you don't. You just learn to live with the knowledge that the world is darker than you thought, and the people you trusted were never who you believed them to be. So where does that leave us? Sitting here, years later, watching this story like it's something that happened to someone else, in some other place, in some other time. But it didn't. It happened in 2018, in Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States of America. In a world where we have cameras everywhere, regulations for everything, oversight committees and licensing boards and mandatory reporting laws, and still a woman was raped for months, maybe years, and no one knew until she gave birth. That's the truth that breaks you. Not just what happened to Jane Doe, but what it reveals about all of us. About the systems we've built, the priorities we've chosen, the people we've decided don't matter enough to protect. Nathan Sutherland is in prison. Hacienda HealthCare is still operating, though under new management and with stricter protocols. Jane Doe is still in a care facility somewhere, still in a vegetative state, still unaware of any of it. And her son is growing up, loved by her family, but carrying an origin story no child should have to bear. This story isn't just a tragedy, it's a warning. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a nurse, a caregiver, a trusted professional. And it thrives in the shadows, in the places where no one is watching, where the victims can't speak, where society has decided not to look too closely. If this story disturbed you, good. It should. Because the only thing more terrifying than what happened to Jane Doe is the possibility that it's still happening to someone else, right now, in a facility just like the one she was in. And no one knows, no one's checking, no one's asking the right questions, until it's too late, until another baby is born into a nightmare, until another family's trust is shattered, until another headline screams the unthinkable, and we all shake our heads and ask how that could happen. And the answer, the one we don't want to hear, is simple. It happens because we let it, because we looked away, because some lives matter less than others. And that's the truth that will break you. Not just the story, but the reflection it holds up, the one that shows us exactly who we are when we think no one is watching.